Good morning, everyone. This is Seth Moore coming again to you here on Anchor by Spotify. Hope you had a pleasant night's sleep and that you are feeling well. Of course, as you know, we're continuing with our series, The Whitening of Latin America. And as we mentioned before, this is a quite lengthy series, and so as promised, we're going to continue with it so that you're able to get all this information. Okay, I don't normally do a podcast in the morning, but here in the Love State, it is raining, and I am working from home today. So I thought it'd be good that I take some time out to do a podcast before I actually got started. So we're going to begin in a moment, but we want to start out like we did on yesterday. We want you to take a moment and breathe in, inhale and exhale. Picture yourself being in a tranquil place where you desire to be, whether it be in a cabin in the woods, whether you're on a mountain under the starlight. Just let your mind go. Oftentimes we have a very active mind, and the mind is leading us to think a lot of things that we may not want to be given thoughts to. So this is why I often say you are not the mind. You have to control what you think. You have mastery of your mind. You tell your mind what to think because it is just the mind. It is not you. And a lot of times people think it is the mind who is the totality of the individual, the essence of the person, but it is not, because you're comprised of many different components: soul, spirit, body, mind, aura. So breathe in and release. Take control of your breaths. And when you begin to do this as a daily practice, you'll find that as you control your breathing, it helps you with thought process. I used to have a very overactive mind. When I began to take hold of the universe, let me just say this really quickly, and I began to center myself, in the center of my spirituality, and begin to think on those things that were outside of myself, I found that the mind that I once had was gone. And this is what you have to do. See, because the mind can wreak havoc on you. It has it's like a computer. And so you have to slow down your mind like you do your breathing so you can master the mind. See, because the mind, as I often say, it is the ego. It is the ego. And it wants to tell you which way to go, what to do. And some of you may be saying, well, how can I operate without my mind? You really can't, but you have to master it. You have to tell it what to think. And oftentimes, what will happen sometimes as you begin to master it It'll try to throw you all these crazy nuances, these crazy thoughts, but you have to tell it, that is not my thought. Because oftentimes what is happening, whether or not you're aware of it, is in the realm of spirituality. There are a lot of things that are being thrown at you. There are a lot of darts being thrown at you because there are people, unbeknownst to you, that may not like you, pretend to like you, different things in the world just thrown at you. And you have to put up that magnetic field to block those things. And the way in which you do that is by taking mastery of the mind and bringing in thoughts that are pure, bringing in thoughts that are just, bringing in thoughts that are about the universe. Think about a waterfall. Think about the birds. Think about the trees. Think about the friends that you have that are real, that you're enjoying yourselves and you're doing things to make conditions around you better in the communities where you live. Think about those things that you want to do that affect change all around you. See yourself in the midst of other people who are enjoying life, who are happy, and get all the toxicity out of your life and refrain from those who are toxic. And be happy and enjoy your life. And in the midst of enjoying your life, you'll find yourself extending yourself to other people and enjoying other people and giving to other people and seeing the needs of others. It's good to be alive. Inhale and exhale. Your life has meaning. Your life has profound meaning. We're going to begin in a moment where we left off on yesterday. Again, you're listening to Scott Buckley, Seth Moore, coming to you here again on Anchor by Spotify. Give us a moment and we're going to be right back. Okay, and we're here with you again. This is Seth Moore coming to you once again here on Anchor by Spotify. It is a rainy day here in the Love State, and it is currently 9:05 a.m. in the morning. And we know some of you are en route to work. Some of you are already at work. And we hope that you have a moment to take out in your busy day to listen to what we have to give you. And we're going to pick up where we left off and give you this information. And so again, we were talking about the disposing of the Afro-Brazilian people in Latin America, as well as Costa Rica, Uruguay, Puerto Rico, and all of these different regions. And in the midst of this disposing of this indigenous group of people, there was also repatriation, where sometimes people will have so much pressure, if in fact they have the means to leave an area because of the pressure that they're undergoing, they'll repatriate and they'll pick up and leave. And then sometimes repatriation is really not even a choice. It's a forced upon them, and they don't have no other option but to be removed. So in a lot of cases, this is what happens. Excuse me. And of course, they, as a countermeasure, they'll build alliances, as you heard me read on yesterday, and they'll begin to build social, coalitions and so forth to ward off these attacks that they're undergoing. And so we're going to start okay, so let's see. And as I read to you yesterday, they began to create social clubs and so forth to have some kind of foundational political and social base, that they had something wherein they can fight the powers that be. So I'll start from that point again. In this way, as I said before, if in fact we are being repetitive, you know why. Okay. So members often found discrimination impossible to ignore. Okay. And however, in denunciations and protests of racial barriers in theaters, restaurants, schools, parks, and other public facilities appeared frequently in the club's activities and discourse. This was even more the case in black civic associations, which were explicitly devoted to racial uplift in Brazil, Cuba, Uruguay, three of the country's most powerful, powerfully affected by European immigration. These organizations eventually gave rise to black political parties. Not surprisingly, immigration and the problems that it had created for the black population was one of the principal issues addressed by all three parties shortly after its founding in Sao Paulo in 1931. The Frente Negra Brasileira, Brazilian Black Front, announced a hard nationalist campaign against the foreign or semi-foreign slime that had entered the country during the previous 40 years and called on the federal government to close the doors of Brazil to foreigners for 20 years or more to give black people the chance to recover from the damage done by European immigration. And it's absolutely correct. It called on, I like that term, it said a hard nationalist campaign against the foreign or semi-foreign slime. That's what they were, they slime. See, because when you come into a place and dispose of a culture that was already there, so that you can actually whiten the place up, to change the demographics, to change the dynamics of a place, to disrupt the harmony and social order of a people. You are slime. Okay, so let's read on. The ending of the Republic and one-party rule in 1930 opened the way for multi-party electoral competition, and the Frente's goal was to create a vehicle to represent Afro-Brazilians' interests in that competition. Local chapters formed throughout Sao Paulo and the neighboring state of Minas Gerais and in Espírito Santo, Bahia, and Rio Grande do Sul. The Frente's example even spread beyond Brazil, prompting the creation of the Partido Autoconoto Negro in Uruguay in 1937. The Frente and the Partido Autoconoto campaigned intensively for their candidates, but in both cases, the black vote simply failed to materialize, or rather, when it did, it went not to blacks parties, but to the mainstream establishment parties. Despite the Partido Autotono's charge that those parties, that's the correct pronunciation, will never be able to understand the genuine reality of the racial problem. When it came time to vote, recalls a former member of the black, quote, race was either Blanco, Colorado, the two main parties in Uruguay, and they weren't interested in anything else. We ran a massive campaign from the interior of the country to Montevideo, but it didn't make any difference. Of 375,000 votes cast in the national elections of 1938, only 87 went to the Partido Autotono. Results were equally disappointing in Brazil, where Frente and Negra candidates in Sao Paulo, Salvador, and other towns and cities received just a handful of votes, and not a single one was elected. This was also the case with other black political parties of this period. The Partido Independiente de Colo, which is PIC in Cuba, the PIC was the product of a half century of political mobilization among Afro-Cubans as soldiers and officers in the three independent wars, as members of the mainstream political parties, moderates, and autonomous under Spanish rule, and liberals and conservatives following independence, and in the colored societies that joined to form the Directorio Central. Though the Directorio closed its doors in 1894, local societies continued to exist and were joined by other organizations during the early 1900s as the black middle class continued to expand. As you already know, that black soldiers, we've been in all the wars, from the Spanish to the Korean to World War I, World War II, to Montezuma. I mean, you name it. We've been in all the wars of the Americas. And it's really sad when you think about how we've died and bled in all these wars to come home and to be mistreated. There were even mobs of men waiting for black soldiers to get off trains who mobbed and beat them and burnt down their towns just heinous things that were done. I read on. This level of organization, the relatively large size of the Afro-Cuban middle class, and the enactment of genuinely universal male suffrage in post-independence Cuba all made the Afro-Cuban population a political force to be reckoned with. And if you go back to the 1950s, where in Cuba there was great uprisings for political solvency, where a lot of Cubans were killed, reckoned with. Okay, prominent politicians, including national presidents, cultivated relations with the black societies and appeared regularly at their functions and solidly establishments, newspapers, including the Voice of Cuba Conservatism, Havana's Diario de la Marina, ran weekly columns in which black journalists and contributors discussed issues of concern to Afro-Cubans. Still, resentments and grievances lingered. Black participants in the independent movement had believed that they were forging, in the words of independence leaders Jose Marti, and racially egalitarian republic with all and for all, offering full participation to blacks and whites alike. Instead, the new political order seemed to channel most of the benefits of independence to white Cubans. Listen to this. And even to Spanish immigrants rather than to blacks. Now, are we having that problem today where we see immigrants coming to the country? You're seeing a lot of Mexicans and El Salvadorians and Guatemalans, and they're invading the country and demanding rights and demanding, subsidies and so forth that they're not entitled to. They don't want to fight in their country, but they'll come to the Americas, okay, and demand things that indigenous people here find it hard to receive, such as bank loans and other things. So this is an ongoing issue in this country, and again, when you see the game, you see how the acculturation, where they move people in to replace other people, or if not replacing you, to subjugate you. So it's all a game. It's all a game. And see, a lot of us still be thinking, we still be thinking that we're doing something great. But under this system, you're still a slave. You're still a slave under this system. Because in other countries, such as the continent, when you buy a home, the home is yours. You're not paying a mortgage every month. You're not paying a mortgage every month. You're free and clear. Okay? There are beautiful places in the continent where when you buy, it's yours. The land is your, the plot of land that's sitting on is yours. Now, the government may own the land, but you don't have to be concerned with paying a yearly tax. You don't have to be concerned with paying that, okay? And somebody coming, taking your house or whatever if you don't pay the taxes on it every year. So a lot of us, we be running our mouths and, I'm this, I'm that, and then if you miss, they come in to get their stuff. You don't own it. You're still a slave. And so this is why you have so many people fighting, because they want to be removed from the slave system, because that's really what it is. You're still under a slave system because you never really own anything in this country. They're coming to get what you have if you don't give them that dough. Hello, somebody. Still, resentments and grievances lingered, as I read. Black participants in the independence movement had believed that they were forging, in the words of independence leaders Jose Marti, a radically egalitarian republic with all and for all, offering full participation to blacks and whites alike, as I read. Again, instead, the new political order seemed to channel most of the benefits of independence to white Cubans. See that? See how they do that? To white Cubans. Now, although you have black Cubans, what are they doing? They're creating a system of whiteness. Okay? It was given to white Cubans and even to Spanish, immigrants, rather than to blacks. And we have that happening today. So you'll have people getting subsidies that the average person who looks like you and me may find it hard to get. Not that you can't get it, but you probably have to go through a whole bunch of red tape. You know? I could remember some years ago, here in Virginia, where I went to get my license renewed. And they had all of these immigrants. They had all these immigrants there. And this is when, and I mean, it's still happening today, but this is when this influx of immigrants were just like in the country. This was during like 2006, 2004, in between that time. And as I was in the line, the lady was, they had one light white lady, one black lady, and they were saying, they was checking everybody's credentials to see whether, you were, within that criteria to receive your license. And I remember the lady saying to me, well, you need a passport, you need a birth certificate, you need electric bill, and I'm saying, you need all of that, ma'am? Yes, because she was like, yes, because the problem that we're having with people getting their license again, they just made it a big problem. So these people actually had the system so jacked up. I mean, that they were telling people who were already born in this country that you had to prove your status of being a citizen in this country. It was ridiculous. So I'll move on. Instead, the new political order seemed to channel most of the benefits of independence to white Cubans and even to Spanish immigrants. I think I read that, right? Rather than to blacks. As part of its campaign to whiten the islands, listen to this, as part of its campaign to whiten the island's racially mixed population. This is exactly what was going on. Acculturation. As part of its campaign, as I read, to whiten the population, or to whiten the island's racially mixed populations, the Republican government of the early 1900s actively promoted Spanish immigration. Once arrived in Cuba, Spaniards received overt hiring preferences from public government and private employers. Afro-Cuban veterans, including officers with distinguished records of service to the independence cause, found themselves passed over for government jobs. Ain't that some shit? While Spaniards and Cuban whites who had played no role, who had played no role in the struggle or even opposed it, received lucrative positions and appointments. And this is what is happening, y'all. And it happens all the time. All the time. You have people who fought, bled, and died. And it's the same thing with you going on a job, being credentialed and being qualified, and you're being passed over because you have dark skin. for somebody who's less qualified or may not even be qualified at all, but they'll give this person, because they may have white skin, they'll give this person the position and they will train that person. And in some cases, have another dark person train that person to remove the person who is actually doing the training. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that. There have been cases on jobs where they have a black individual or an indigenous individual train a white person who is less qualified for his position. These are the kind of games, this is the kind of stuff that has been going on forever. Okay. And they, it says here, passed over. Pass over, y'all. Let me read that one more time. Let me read that one more time. It says Afro-Cuban veterans, including officers with distinguished records of service to the independence cause, found themselves passed over for government jobs, while Spaniards, right, and Cuban whites who had played no role in the struggle or even opposed it received lucrative positions and appointments. And in other words, too, you think about all these people who will come in this country, Indians. Sorry for the interruption, and we are back again to continue our series on the whitening of Latin America. I was so rudely interrupted, and I apologize. So we are back, and we were just saying how that, you know, these officers, these Afro-Cubans were passed over for the Spaniards and Cuban whites that had played no role in the struggle or even opposed it, receiving lucrative positions and appointments, as I've read previously. Okay, and it's the same thing where you'll find a lot of these people, as I was saying, who will come into the country, Indians, Arabs, Mexicans, all of these people from all these places, even Africans, who were not here during the 60s when we were building the foundation of inclusiveness. Okay? It was indigenous, it was the African, or whatever you want to call it, the Niji of this land, the indigenous people of this land, who laid the foundation. None of these people were here. None of these people were here during those times, being bludgeoned to death, hanging on trees, burnt alive, you know, you name it. But here they come. Here they come. After all was said and done, here these people come demanding shit, you know, when they laid no foundation here. None. And sometimes I will make this known to people, and they'll look at me like I'm crazy. I said, you can look at me crazy all you want. Where were you when our folks were being beat down in the street, hanged on trees, you know, lynched, mobbed, wealthy neighborhoods being burnt to the ground? Where were you? Where were your people? You were nowhere around. Now you come 30, 40 years later, wanting the resources and subsidies off of what our ancestors built and died and bled for. The nerve of you. And then think you have a damn right. I'll move on. Okay. And as you heard me read, of course, they got these positions. As in other Spanish American countries, politically active Afro Cubans tended to identify with the Liberal Party. Black veterans and politicians pressured the party through the Action Committee of Colored Veterans, formed in the 1902 and joined in the unsuccessful Liberal Rebellion of 1906. But by the end of the decade, a number of veterans and activists were calling for the creation of a new racially defined party. After a series of public meetings in towns and cities around the island, the Partido Independiente de Color was established in Havana in 1908. The party only competed in a single election, that of 1908, and its performance was marginal. In congressional races in which conservative and liberal candidates polled anywhere between 20,000 and 50,000 votes, no PIC candidate received more than 116. And it probably was rigged. You probably know that. Despite this poor showing, liberals viewed the upstart party as a potential threat to their control over the black vote. Early in 1910, the Cuban Congress passed an amendment introduced by Afro-Cuban Senator Martin Morua Delgado to outlaw parties composed of members of a single race. PIC leaders lobbied Congress and recognized its considerable power in Cuban politics, the U.S. State Department, to overturn the bill as unconstitutional. But neither institution budged. Over 200 party members were arrested during the spring and summer and imprisoned until the fall elections were over. In the face of this repression, hundreds of members and activists withdrew from the party. Those remaining determined not to be barred from the elections of 1912 planned an armed demonstration for May to demand the overturning of the Morua Amendment. In Cuba, as in other Spanish-American countries during the early years of independence, armed actions of this sort were a standard feature of political competition. But in this instance, the government response was far from typical. Instead of arresting and imprisoning party members, the government launched a campaign of extermination that killed most of the leadership, much of the rank and file, and several thousand Afro-Cubans who had no connection whatsoever with the party. That's what they do. When you stand up for your rights and you demand your rights, they find ways to exterminate you. And as you just heard me read, they begin to kill these activists and leaders. Why did the government respond with such excessive force? Certainly, one motive was the desire of the ruling Liberal Party to remove a potential source of electoral competition, though by so murderously repressing the PIC, the Liberals may have done themselves more harm than good. Through the rest of the 1910s and in the 1920s, the conservatives made considerable political capital of the massacre, denouncing former Liberal President Jose Miguel Gomez as the one who machine-gunned the colored race and urging black voters to remember that great slaughter of May 1912. It is impossible to know, and I quote, for certain what effects this appeal had, but the liberals were voted out of power in the fall of 1912 and did not regain the presidency until 12 years later, end of quote. The spectacle of an armed black political movement triggered deep-seated fears in Cuban society of Haitianization and Africanization, the possibility that rebel forces might take over the island and turn it into a black republic. Those fears clearly played a role in the massacre, just as did in the government of offensive against African-based religions and music. And as we know, the Haitian Revolution, they were not playing. Okay? And we already know, y'all, about Haiti, how they beat the shit out of the French. You know what I'm saying? And the French vowed to because of they lost to the Haitian in the Haitian Revolution with Toussaint Louverture and so forth. You already know that they vowed to keep Haiti poor, a certain region of Haiti poor. Now, when you look at certain places in Haiti, Haiti is rich in resources. They say that Haiti has a mountain of this mineral that the U.S. guards in Haiti, because this mineral that is in Haiti is actually a mineral that the island received from a meteor hundreds of years ago that fell in Haiti. And this mineral is so dense, it's so hard that they use it for, tanks, missiles, and other things. And so, from research and from so forth, they have a military presence in this particular area in Haiti where they guard this mineral. And they will not allow the Haitians to have access to it. And so, as we all know, Haiti has been under the rule of the U.S. and the French. And in fact, had the Haitians pay them back reparations for whooping their ass. Think about that. So we know who we're dealing with. You're dealing with the lowest form of a I don't even want to call it a species. You're dealing with the lowest form of this germ when it comes to the subjugation and the dismantling of people and slaughter of people. And like I said, we're in a time now where we're seeing retribution taking place. And like I said, it's only begun. It's only begun. Okay, the spectacle of an armed black political movement triggered deep-seated fears in Cuban society, as I've read, of Haitianization and Africanization, the possibility that rebel forces might take over the island and turn it into a black republic. Those fears clearly played a role in the massacre, just as did in the government offensive against African-based religion and music. But it is important to note that the killings were confined almost entirely to the eastern province of Oriente, the principal area in which the rebellion originally planned to be island-wide actually materialized, explaining why the rebellion erupted only in that province and why government repression was so extreme, points us toward yet another source of conflict during the export years, continuing struggles over land. There it is. Over land, y'all. You already know it. And you know what they say. He who owns the land makes the rules. As Europeans and North Americans consumed ever greater quantities of sugar, coffee, bananas, cocoa, and other plantation-based crops, export earnings poured into Afro Latin America, providing, remember those words, Afro Latin America, providing landowners with both the capital and the incentive to expand and develop their land holdings. So, as we know, this is what the European has done. Comes into a place, acculturates the society, takes control over the resources that he didn't have now, mind you. Okay? and begins to create laws and build institution governments whereby the subjugation of people, you have to have a system, and it's really a pseudo system. So if you have, just like the Black Hawaiians, if you have a government and a charter in place and a constitution already in place, when these settlers, or whatever you want to call them, when they come in, they dismantle. They'll either dismantle what you have, but usually what they'll do is they'll take what you already have and they'll tweak it to their benefit. Because why would you? Because listen, make no mistake about it. When the settlers came to the Americas and they made treaties with the indigenous Indians and the Moors and so forth, they already had treaties and constitutions in place. So the Constitution of the United States is not a new constitution, whether or not you guys know this. There was a constitution already in place. They took the constitution of the indigenous people and used it for their own good, and did some things with it where they changed some things around and made different things, laws, so forth and so on, and used it for their benefit. Okay? And this is what often happens. So again, they seeing the resources, as I read, the coffee, bananas, cocoa, sugar, and other plantation-based crops exporting earnings poured into Afro Latin America, providing landowners with both the capital and the incentive to expand and develop their land holdings. As was read, black peasants, listen, black peasants now. They're saying black peasants, can you believe this? Give me one sec. Black peasants with legal title to their land had some chance of resisting landowners' encroachments and even of profiting from increased demand for their products. But those who had squatted on public or abandoned private lands were vulnerable. Export earnings enriched national governments as well, enabling them to create the armed forces required to restore order to the countryside and bring the 19th century civil wars to an end. This extension of state authority into rural areas gave landowners the means to reestablish control over lands that earlier in the century they had been forced to cede to squatters and tenants. It also permitted national governments to reassert control over publicly owned state lands, vast tracts of which were now handed over to private investors through land grants or sales. In other words, it's another form of theft, another form of stealing. This is what is done everywhere these people went. If there were owners of the land, they found ways to either trick them out of it or to outright take it. And if they couldn't take it, they would kill you and take it. Okay. It also permitted national governments to reassert, as I read, control over publicly owned state lands, vast tracts of which were now handed over to private investors through land grants or sales. In Mexico, the distribution of state-owned lands during this period struck directly at listen now, Indian and Mestizo peasants, creating the massive dispossession that set the stage for the Mexican Revolution. In the countries of Afro-Latin America, the privatization of public or communally owned lands had similarly negative effects on peasants who found themselves pushed off their subsistence farms and losing the investments that they had made in buildings, coffee bushes, fruit trees, and other crops. This process of enclosure was most intense and widespread in Cuba, already the center of the New World sugar production during the 1800s. The island experienced a massive infusion of American capital between 1890 and 1920, resulting in the reorganization and modernization and further expansion of the sugar industry. Part of that reorganization was the subcontracting of cane production to small and medium holder colonos who grew cane either on their own land or on land rented from the plantations. Some black farmers, particularly those who had acquired land earlier in the 1800s, were able to take part in the colono production. Nevertheless, as early as 1900, the ranks of the colonato were overwhelmingly white and became even more so as time went on. I don't need to tell you what happened. You already know what happened. Withdrawing in the face of the plantations advanced many Afro-Cubans, especially those recently freed ex-slaves, which, with no claims to land ownership, migrated from the western sugar-growing zones of Havana and Matanza to Oriente, where large tracts of forest remain unsettled and available for cultivation by squatters, but empty land attracted sugar companies as well as peasants. During the early 1900s, a number of U.S.-owned firms opened operations in the province, again driving small holders off the land. The result was a state constant tension, violence, and petty banditry in the Oriente countryside. It was hardly surprising then that when the PIC called for armed action in 1912 to protest being banned from the elections of that year, the province erupted in rebellion. Nor, given Oriente's recent history, was it entirely surprising that the government resorted to such savage repression to put down the rebellion. From the runaway communities of the early 1800s through the three independent wars, the province had been a national center of black resistance, first to slavery, Spanish rule, now to land dispossession. And with the arrival of U.S. sugar companies, the stakes at play in such rebellions were higher than ever before. Peasants in arms threatened not just public order and security by placing in jeopardy tens of millions of dollars in foreign investment, they directly threatened Cuban national sovereignty as well. During the years of the export boom, the United States sent troops repeatedly into Caribbean nations, including Cuba. The most frequent justification for those interventions was the protection of American economic interests and a peasant rebellion aimed at U.S.-owned sugar companies obviously endangered such interests. The Gomez administration therefore had to repress the revolt immediately and remove the threat of future such uprisings. Yet, and we'll finish up here for now, just as the repression of 1912 failed to maintain the liberals in power, so too did it fail to keep the United States from intervening in Cuban affairs. U.S. companies, fearing the destruction of their property, appealed to Washington for protection, and U.S. Marines landed in the province the following week. Nor did the repression prevent future such episodes. 5 years later, the liberal rebellion of 1917 set off a renewed wave of looting, arson, and banditry by peasant rebels in Oriente. This time, both the number of rebels involved, 10,000 according to the local U.S. consul, and the level of destruction, 100,000 tons of sugar cane burnt in the northern part of the province and tens of thousands more in other areas, were far greater than in 1912. In 1912, the Marines had remained for only a month. After 1917, they stayed in the province for 5 years. Even so, the peasant rebels were never completely put down, and they continued to operate in the mountains and forests of the Sierra Maestra. Was among the descendants of those rebels still living in their mountain redoubts. That Fidel Castro and Che Guevara found their first recruits when they arrived in Oriente in 1956. Same old game, y'all. Come take people's stuff, kill people, repress the population, dispose of, do whatever you have to do, about stealing people's land. And think about this. The whole world was stolen by these people. The whole world. See, because honestly and truthfully speaking, these people did not have anything. When they were releasing their criminals from England and all these different places, the United States, the northern states, or the northern territories, I should say, because at that particular time, there wasn't no states. There wasn't any governing body of, a consensus called the United States at that time. Because when these settlers were coming in, they were setting up shop and, doing what they do, killing people, taking people's lands, removing people, expatriating people from, their lands and so forth, and disposing of people and tribes and so forth. So they did not have anything. When the Moors went into Spain, as said many times before, they brought culture, they brought science, they brought mathematics, they brought civilization, because these people were in squalor. They were in a dark time. And in fact, the indigenous people civilized them twice. Because when they came into Spain and civilized them, and brought music, first conservatories of music, they brought arts, they brought the sciences, they brought the liberal arts, the 7 liberal arts. They brought geometry, trigonometry, algebra, the concept of zero. They brought culinary, they brought dates, they brought lemons, they brought pomegranates, they brought rice, they brought saffron, they brought asparagus. These are the things that these people never experienced because they were starving, they was diseased. They were living in the house in their barns with their animals. They were throwing their crap out of the windows because they had no sewage system. They had none of this. And they was taught by the Moors with all of this. And they even today in a lot of the European countries, they have parades and festivals, denoting and the Moors and so forth and how, but they do it in a very derogatory way. The nerve, it's like the nerve of you. These are the people that civilized you, but then they want to put on blackface and make fun of these people, make fun of our ancestors. Really? And so after the Moors were expelled, Europe went into the Dark Ages again. They had 1,000 years of it being in squalor and in a bad situation. So we're going to stop there today. And we're going to come back again, of course. And we ask that you continue to stay with us. We hope that you're having a really good day. And wherever you are, that is going as you desire. Okay? So, again, this is Seth Moore coming to you here, again on Anchor by Spotify. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you soon.